Julian Sands is here. The British actor is famous for his roles in The Killing Fields, A Room with a View, and the television series 24. He is in New York performing a one-man show called Harold Pinter, A Celebration. It is directed by John Malkovich and playing at the Irish Repertory Theatre until November 30th.
You'd find me turning from the long bar. Glasses raised, one for you, one for me. Every morning I wake up and oh my God, I'm going to the Irish Rep to present A Celebration of Harold Pinter. And it fills me with a kind of joy and an anticipation. It is raw and unplugged. It oozes the spirit of theatre.
I've founded the theatre with my partner Charlotte Moore. I'd say everything is Irish about the Irish Repertory Theatre. Everything perhaps but maybe shamrocks and shillelaghs.
You and Kieran work very closely together. Has it been a cloudless friendship?
Oh yes. Oh yes, there's never a harsh word between us. The broken bones, the beatings, the humiliations that I have endured are a testament to how well we get along.
But actually you did break some bones here, didn't you?
I fell down the stairs on the way down to the lower level here, and I broke 4 ribs in my clavicle and 2 knees and a wrist. Yes, I've sacrificed for the good of the theatre.
What's it like working with Kieran and Charlotte? It almost seems like a family atmosphere here.
Well, I think that's exactly right. They have inhabited this sort of parental mantle.
Julian Sands said to me that when he comes here, it's like being in the family home of the family that everybody would always have wanted. How do you feel about that?
I don't know whether they'd want it all the time, but yeah, we do have a family atmosphere here. I think we all respect one another.
Where are we right now?
We're in the laundry room, thank you. And we're in the green room. The actors use this as a green room. She does the laundry here and irons. The actors all use this place to have their tea and gossip and fall in love and get divorced and fall in love again. And it's a very warm and nice and safe place.
I can't help noticing that there are these slogans daubed on the walls like, keep the Brits out. Is that your normal decoration here?
No, it certainly isn't. We are all welcoming to all people, particularly British people. Get the Brits out is one of the murals that came from Derry and Belfast, and they surround the theatre here for our production of Brian Friel's The Freedom of the City.
Do not attempt to enter or engage.
When people come in, they actually encounter British soldiers. It's just to sort of give the feeling of what Northern Ireland was like.
We're showing Freedom of the City in the main stage, and we're showing Julian Sands in the Celebration of Harold Pinter in the downstairs studio space.
He'll call again. I'll be back in time for tea.
There's an Irish patriot, James Connolly, who once said that the struggles of the Irish people are the struggles of the people all over the world. And I think that when we put on a great work of art, people are going to identify it with, no matter where they're from.
It weaves together anecdotes about the Nobel Prize-winning playwright Harold Pinter with readings from his poetry. The play closes with a love poem addressed to his wife Antonia Fraser and a meditation on death.
Poem for A. I shall miss you so much when I am dead. The loveliest of smiles, the softness of your body in our bed. My everlasting bride, remember that when I'm dead, you are forever in my heart and my head. I know the place, it is true. Everything we do corrects the space between death and me and you.
Harold Pinter died in December 2008. I went to London to interview him on the stage of the Old Vic in 2006. At the time, he was already suffering from the cancer that would kill him.
As a writer and as a dramatist, you approach reality from a number of perspectives. Like the crystal ball of this world goes around, and you're trying to find where the light is actually falling. That's the only way I can approach reality, is the way I do.
I am pleased to have Julian Sands at this table. Welcome. It's good to have you here.
Well, thank you, Charlie.
Tell me what this is about. I mean, it's a celebration of Harold Pinter, but...
What it sets out to reveal is Harold Pinter, the man. His intelligence, his wit, his politics, his philosophy, his love, his humanity. It'd be very difficult to have a notion of who Harold Pinter was from seeing the plays. The author is an oblique figure, but through his poetry and prose, through interviews, through my own remembrances, through other people's remembrances, he is fully revealed, and it makes for a very colourful and entertaining portrait, full of memorable, emotional depth.
So someone comes up to you and says, having done all this, having known all this, having experienced all this, who is Harold Pinter?
I'd say come and see the show at the Irish Rep. For me, Harold is somebody I'm in search of every night. This is why the material is never boring. I'm totally engaged in it every time, and because there is such there are so many facets to his personality and to his intelligence, but I find him fascinating and compelling, like when I'm with him or with his material, it's like having a bird of prey on one's arm. That's what I feel like, that there is this potential for something explosive and dramatic and incisive that could happen. It's like walking around with a live Exocet missile, and that's what I feel like, and it's very exciting and very intriguing to have that kind of relationship.
And how did it come into being?
Came into being because in 2005, you interviewed him in 2006 so memorably. He had committed to giving a charity recital of a selection of his poetry, but his advancing illness had impaired his voice, and he was unable to deal with the acoustics of the venue, but didn't want to cancel it. I was having a conversation with him about David Hare's play Stuff Happens, in which I just played Tony Blair, so you can imagine he was very animated on that.
Yes.
At the end of which he said, look, I'd like you to consider stepping in for me at this event, conditional of spending some time together so I can instruct you, tutor you in how I want these poems read. So I did a recital of his poetry, and everything, you know, went well. After his death in 2008, I was in Los Angeles, and there was nothing, there was no sort of memorial service, so I asked Antonia if I could repeat the recital at a gathering of British actors and interested people in Los Angeles. And I thought to just present them without a context didn't make sense, so I combed the obituaries for pithy comments and talked to one or two people so I could pepper the event with remembrances and other people's thoughts. Well, people were so entertained and astounded by the depth and power of his poetry and by the entertaining comments people had about him that it sort of, John Malkovich heard it and said, look, if ever
he heard of it and said,
he heard the video, he heard that recital, and he said, if ever you want to turn it into a legitimate theatrical experience, you know, let's do it. Yeah. And I said, yeah, maybe one day. Well, then somebody asked us to go to the Edinburgh Festival, and I called John.
So what was it to be taught Harold Pinter by Harold Pinter?
Well, it was, I allowed myself to, you know, become some 45-year-old teacher's pet, and in my self-confidence, when he gave me one of the poems, I said, oh, Harold, I think there's a typo here. And he looked at me and said, what? I said, well, it says here, corrects Harold's. Surely it should be connects. You know, just read it one day, you might understand.
Yeah, I could hear
so
it. I could hear it.
There was, it was like, you know, swimming with a tiger shark, or there was his power and his possessiveness of his own poetry. He was grateful, I think, to me for reading it, but I was also an emblem of his own mortality. And so our relationship was both paternal, mentoring, but there was also something which...
Paternal?
Well, I think he's, as a paternalistic figure, he was an older person, I think he explained to me some of the poetry as he might to a younger person.
Did you walk out of this experience a better actor?
I think I came out of this experience a much better actor. I think Pinter had been a big hero of mine. At high school, we studied Pinter. At theatre school, we were always using Pinter's text as the basis for scene work. I'd done a film of The Room for Robert Altman. And so to work with this man, yes, he had a heroic position in my life. And to have him be very clear about how he wanted this work presented was an enormous gift. And it's a gift which has informed every piece of acting I've been involved with since then, I would say.
And what's interesting about this is that some of the lesser-known poems are here, too.
Yes, they are.
The range of things that he did.
I mean, there was great... people think of him as being, you know, an irascible lefty war, taking anti-war. But some of the war poetry has such universal tenderness and depth that it's beyond politics. It's really, it has about it something Homeric, I believe.
This is what he said in an interview with the Paris Review. I have nothing to say about myself directly. I wouldn't know where to begin, particularly since I often look at myself in the mirror and say, who the hell is that? Well, I think he probably had a pretty good idea of who the hell that was. Right. And appreciation of who the hell that was.
Yes, indeed. No, although he used mirrors as a metaphor for all kinds of... I mean, in the Nobel speech, the last paragraph is all about when we look in the mirror.
I mean, is there something to be said or a reason to understand why he moved from poetry early in his life to prose later?
I think he was always writing poetry, and he continued to write poetry throughout the period of writing plays and prose. I think he ran out of gas for plays in the late 20th century, but continued to write poetry and poetic prose up until his death. His love for Antonia is an extraordinary and remarkable, enduring testament to the power of adult relationships.
And scandalous in its beginning. Scandalous
from other people's points of view, not from their own. As Antonia said, they were just a middle-aged couple who wanted to live together. But from the moment he looked at this dinner party in 1975 and said, "Must you go?" I mean, they were inseparable.
He said, "Must you go?"
There was a dinner given in his honour, and she, as a literary figure, being a successful biographer, was there.
Yeah.
At the end of this dinner, she stood to say her goodnights, and he looked at her and said, "Must you go?" They were inseparable from that moment until his death. 33 years.
From that moment?
From that moment. It's all laid out in Antonia's book, "Must You Go? My Life with Harold Pinter." I mean, it was complicated at the beginning, but they both had a clear vision of a much simpler life and how to resolve the complications.
We have to remember also that he was an actor.
He was a very good actor.
Yeah. Appeared as Beckett in a Beckett play near the end of his life.
Yes, he did. Krapp's Last Tape, and is amazing in it. I mean, your clip shows his, his physical condition deteriorated, decrepit, but the power with which he can harness his physical condition and focus it into playing Krapp made for an amazing piece of theatre.
What was the relationship with Beckett?
I think he had great respect and regard for Beckett. But he was ways very adamant. You know, Beckett wrote Beckett plays, Pinter wrote Pinter plays. He didn't want to be pigeonholed with Beckett in a minor role. I mean, they were separate, and for all his and he resisted acknowledging an influence from Beckett.
Resisted.
I would say so. I think he wanted to. He was very insistent that there was a separation of creative forces at work. His creative process was his creative process, and whatever he felt about Beckett, Beckett wrote Beckett. Pinter wrote Pinter.
Before I get too far away from this, because I discussed it, this is the final scene of a celebration, a love poem to Antonia Fraser and a reflection on death. Here it is.
The last paragraph of the Nobel lecture, Art, Truth and Politics. When we look into a mirror, we think the image that confronts us is accurate. But move a millimeter and the image changes. We are actually looking at a never-ending series of reflections. And sometimes the writer has to smash the mirror, for it is on the other side of the mirror that the truth stares at us. I believe that despite
the enormous odds which exist, unflinching, unswerving, fierce intellectual determination as citizens to define the real truth of our lives and our societies is a crucial obligation which devolves upon us all. It is, in fact, mandatory.
Wow.
Great cut. Yeah, powerful, powerful stuff.
When, was it Michael Billington who said memory is almost the key to Pinter's whole work as an artist? You buy that?
Well, I respect anything Michael Billington says because, you know, he's a great critic and he was Harold's biographer. Is memory the great key? Reflection, possibly. Memory, I'm not sure. It's a good statement, and I don't know that that's all it is.
What did you discover as the foundation of his politics?
Well, his manifesto, his political manifesto. We just heard him speak with tremendous and compelling conviction. I think he felt very much that his politics were founded in a resistance of one group of people exploiting and subjugating another. I think that's what was the basis of his politics. He never shied from using his literary power as a dynamic platform for speaking out against what he saw the abuse and misuse of power against those who had contempt for international law. And I think he had, I don't know what, but his hackles really rose against what he saw as American expansionism, American foreign policy, and British foreign policy. Anything which could be seen to be imperialist foreign policy, just...
Yet at the same time, the late Christopher Hitchens and Harold Pinter on dramatically different takes on the Iraq War.
Yes. Well...
That's politics.
That's politics, and that's the humankind.
Exactly.
I mean...
And two learned men, two smart men, two men of letters.
Yes.
Came to this political
both
event.
Passionate and persuasive, and
with different points of view.
Yeah.
The poems you talk about, and we have mentioned this before, allude to death a lot.
Yes. They allude to death. They allude to love. They allude to living life richly and fully. It's the celebration. It's called a celebration because it really is there's a great deal which is positive and life-affirming about his body of work. It's not all moribund and mournful.
And how would you define how it's life-affirming? Because I
would define the work as life-affirming through the complexity with which it embraces so many aspects of what it is to be alive.
Okay. This is what the New York Times has written about your performance. This modest, affecting show embodies the notion of the actor as a transparent vessel through which we see the thoughts and feelings of others. Humility is not a trait usually associated with actors, but there's something profoundly humble about their putting their bodies in the service of other minds. Sands doesn't want to get in Pinter's way.
It's very nice for that reviewer to use those words. For me, I am a conduit from the audience to Harold's work, and I shepherd them towards my appreciation of his work and the gift I think I received from him in being tutored in how to present his work at its most effective.
And the contribution of Malkovich in all this?
John described himself, he described me as the surfer, the material as the surfboard, the waves as the audience, and he himself as the lifeguard, who hopefully had nothing to do. I would say it's a little bit like a soloist working with a conductor. I mean, I can read the music, I can play the instrument, but to hear John just listening to the beats, to the tempo, to the feeling. John's been a friend since we worked together on a film called The Killing Fields.
Right.
And at that time, in 1983, one of the things which drew us together was our enthusiasm for Pinter's language. We both had quite a bit of experience.
Is that why both of you would love the idea of getting on a stage and just, in a sense, with language, communicating without even structure, just with the capacity to use language to tell a story?
We've done that at dinner tables many times. Yeah. We've talked about...
Now, how would it come about at a dinner table?
It's just being two dominating personalities on one end of the table to the other. We have talked about doing... we talked about doing No Man's Land together, which is still a conversation we had. We talked about doing The Dumb Waiter together too. But John's input... John's ear for Harold's language and his sense of theatre is extreme and wonderful. So I felt in very safe hands being listened to.
Here's what you have said: the richness of the language, the outrageous, subversive humor of it, the vicious, violent, uncompromising, stiletto-like confrontations are fantastic for actors.
Yes, I feel that. It is like riding a torpedo through the waves. I mean, forget the surfboard.
And your favorite Pinter play?
Well, I think No Man's Land and The Caretaker I love because I was so affected by them when I first saw them. The great masterpiece is often considered The Homecoming.
Yes, exactly. Right.
You know, I like it all.
Yeah. The most quote in the show, you quote Irving Wardle, who called Harold the most visible person I ever met.
Yes.
What did he mean?
He meant that in comparison with Harold, other people looked blurred because he was such a life force. You know, he was so present, he was so forceful, and he lived by pure intention. I think that's what Irving meant.
Christopher was like that too.
There are many birds of prey like that who one holds on one's arm at a distance.
Yeah. This is what the Nobel Prize Committee said. Pinter restored theater to its basic elements, an enclosed space and unpredictable dialogue where people are at the mercy of one another and pretense crumbles.
Yes. Well, particularly that line where people are at the mercy of one another, it resonates because his characters could be unforgiving and without any sentimentality in their dealings with each other.
He said in the Nobel Prize acceptance speech, language in art remains a highly ambiguous transaction, a quicksand, a trampoline, a frozen pool which might give way under you, the author at any time. But as I have said, the search for the truth can never stop, It cannot be adjourned. It cannot be postponed. It has to be faced right there on the spot. Not a bad imperative for journalists either. Or actors.
Yes, I can think of
or
it.
anyone who is living in a life in which there has to be a demand for truth and answers.
Yes, well, journalists too might read that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a wonderful manifesto for.
Yeah. Here is do you remember this? I mean, I have the close from the same poem. That I know the place, it is true, everything we do corrects the space between death and me and you. What does that mean?
Well, I think it's one of the most beautiful and metaphysically complex poems he wrote. It's also the most simple poem. I think a Buddhist might interpret it as saying is pure karma. He's saying everything we do is what defines us, and everything we do is what separates us from each other. And there's so little time and space and activity between death and me and you.
Read it for me.
I know the place, it is true. Everything we do corrects the space between death and me and you.
You do that well. Let me just tell you, I
was tutored by the master. When I described him as being paternal, I think mentoring is really what I meant. Mentor the great.
Tutored, and mentored.
Yes.
You know, I mean, how would that work? I mean, how did you go about
We sat in his study. We had some work sessions, and I would read it through, and he would say, "Okay, read it again this way." He would read it. I would follow. He wasn't looking to repress my own creative flair, but just to sort of concentrate it, I think.
Thank you. Great to see you. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.